Hey there, I'm Sal. Thanks for checking out the video. This past weekend I replaced the front wheel bearing in my Tundra here. I don't have a shop press, so I rented the bearing puller from O'Reilly's, and it wasn't the easiest thing, but it is possible to do. And I'm going to show you that here in this video. Let's get into it. Okay, before we start the install here, I want to quickly talk about what indications I was seeing and hearing that led me to think I had a bad wheel bearing. So the most obvious was a loud metallic sort of grinding noise that was most prominent between 30 and 40 miles an hour. There was also like a hum that was audible at like lower speeds, like 20 or 30 miles an hour. That was definitely abnormal. I recorded some before and after clips to try and capture these noises as best as I can. So you may have noticed at the end there that the metallic whine would go away if I turned hard enough to the right, and that's another telltale sign that you have a bad wheel bearing. As far as I understand, it's because the bearing itself is built in two halves, and internally as you turn, the pressure from the hub is being pressed on one of the two halves stronger than the other one. So in my case, when I turned right, the hub would press more on the better half of the bearing and the noise would sort of go away. If you look online, a lot of people will say that if you turn right, the bearing noise will go away because you have a bad front right wheel bearing and the weight of the truck is lifted off of that wheel and the bearing will quiet down. But in my case, when I turned right, the sound would go away, but I had a bad front left wheel bearing. So I don't know that that is entirely true. To me, it kind of makes sense, but in practice, it just didn't line up. So unfortunately that leaves us with kind of a non-answer on, okay, I know I have a bad wheel bearing, but I still know which side it is. And fortunately, if you have access to a jack or just some way to get your front wheels off the ground, you can narrow it down with much more certainty as to which side it is. Okay, so once you get the truck up and the wheel off the ground, the first thing you want to do is actually grab the top and bottom of the tire here and give it a little shake up and down. If you feel any movement, then you want to investigate a little bit more, starting with the front suspension, making sure that your upper ball joint, lower ball joint, any bushings, they're not the reason for the slop, and you can eliminate them as a possibility. In my case, it really felt like the movement was coming from down here in the hub. It's a little hard to show on camera, but it really felt like the wheel itself was backing off, like the lug nuts were coming loose or something, but they were all torqued down, and the movement was actually coming from the hub itself. There's also a ton of resistance when trying to spin the wheel with the bad bearing. You could also hear a very distinct grinding noise coming from the hub area. You can see it compared here to the other side, which had a good bearing. So hopefully that was helpful for you in trying to diagnose a bad wheel bearing. Now let's get into removing the old one and pressing the new one in. Okay, cool. So we got the truck up and the wheels off, and I started on removing the brake calipers first. Along with the two bolts on the back of the caliper, I also removed the bolt holding the brake line bracket onto the upper half of the knuckle. This gives us a lot more maneuverability of the caliper to get it up and out of the way. You can see that here. I didn't have any bungee cords, so I just used some zip ties, which worked surprisingly well to get it up and out of the way. From there, I was having a heck of a time removing the caliper, which was seized onto the hub. I soaked it with some PB Blaster, and while I was waiting for that, I went ahead with removing the dust cap covering the axle nut. The rotor was still giving me a hard time, so I made a questionable decision of using the caliper bolts to press it off from the backside. It worked well, but I was definitely a bit worried about damaging the rotor. Next, I got the rotor off and we were going to remove the axle nut. And I recently picked up this Milwaukee high torque impact, so I was excited to see how it would do. Once I braced the hub, it took off this axle nut without even breaking a sweat. In order to pull the axle through the hub, I needed to unbolt the knuckle from the lower ball joint using the 4 bolts that you can access from below. Once I did that, the axle came right through and we could get to pulling. Okay, cool. I just got this puller on. I rented it from O'Reilly. They have a great tool rental program. But I wouldn't say that this is optimized for this Tundra. The distance here between these arms is almost like the same size as the hub here. So it's really close. I was almost worried we weren't going to be able to use it. But it like just barely fits. On the back side, the instructions tell you to just use this single threaded like tapered nut thing on the back. But it's too small. It's the same size, if not smaller, than the actual axle where it connects in. So it would just pass right through the middle and it wouldn't actually pull the hub out. So what I ended up doing actually was using the axle nut that sat on the end here. And I'm using that on the inside along with one of these other spacers to push the actual hub through. As far as getting leverage, it's hard once you remove the lower ball joint. But this one back here is, what is this, 1 1/16. So I have that ratchet on the back, and then on the front, it was 15/16, but I'm using my adjustable wrench up here, and I'm gonna tighten this down and pull this hub out. Okay, so I'm getting to a point where this is starting to walk around on me a little bit as I'm tightening it down. So what I'm gonna do is just take one of these. That one's too big, where is it? One of these and put it in here so that it'll keep this like massive center bolt like centered in the hole. Because right now it's just, like I said, I don't want to chew up these threads or anything where the axle connects. So if we do this, it should keep it more centered. Whew, this is a workout though, for real. But here it comes. Holy moly. Jeez, you think the bearing was bad? The next order of business was to get this outer seal off so that we can access the snap ring holding in the bearing itself. Okay, so I just took the snap ring out and you can see it's all like warped, which tells me, because it was sitting like this, that the bearing was trying to come out and the snap ring was the only thing holding it in, which is a little scary. And also a little scary because I don't have a new one of these, so I gotta go figure out if I can go to the store and get a new one. Okay, got the new snap ring. Man, huge thanks to David for let me borrow your car. Huge help. But you can see just how warped this other one was. It wouldn't even sit flush on the table. So, and when I talked to the guy at the parts department, he was like, "Oh yeah, no, you should be replacing that anyways." So I'm glad I'm doing this. I also went ahead and removed this inner seal as well. This cold chisel came in super handy so many times throughout this whole job. It was just so much better than using a screwdriver. But But this released the spacer and the toothed ABS ring sitting below it, not above it, below it. Anyways, I used a similar setup to before with just some different size plates from the kit that I rented on the back side of the bearing to pull it out. Once you play around with it a little, you quickly get a feel for how it works and what combination of spacers you'll need to get your job done. So my problem now is this old bearing half is left on the hub here, and I don't know what to do about it. I've tried tapping it, and what either happens is like nothing happens, or one time it actually like skipped off and actually like kind of dinged up this outer edge here. One of the videos on YouTube suggests using a Dremel to actually like cut like a diagonal line here and then try to like tap it off that way. So we're gonna have to give that a shot. Hopefully I don't go all the way through. So I tried this Dremel thing for a little while, and I was making zero progress at all. I didn't buy a new hub beforehand because I did some research that apparently was bad, and for some reason I didn't think you could buy it individually. But I looked again, and luckily I found one at the O'Reilly's close by to my house. It was pretty frustrating, and still not having a car to use, I ended up walking down the street to pick up the brand new hub. But my advice, definitely just get the new hub beforehand. It'll save you a bunch of headaches once you're doing it. Next, getting into the install of the new bearing, I heated up the knuckle as best as I could with my ghetto heat gun, and I also had the bearing in the freezer overnight. This was supposed to help the bearing slide in easier, and it should have worked really well. Unfortunately, I was not as prepared as I thought I was once I put it in, and I didn't have the right combination of spacers and plates to have it seat properly. You can just see the bearing thawing out and expanding as I kind of panicked and was trying to find the best way to do it. I finally found a combination of spacers that worked for me. Not saying that this is the proper way of doing it, but this monstrosity was able to get this bearing seated in there. Now, I gotta say, this was by far the most physically grueling part of this install. I was dripping sweat by the end of it, and it required a lot of force to get this in there, even using this big breaker bar. The box says not to use power tools so that you don't damage the puller, so I avoided using the impact gun. That probably would have handled this in less than a minute. Definitely one of the downsides of not using a shop press for this install. Once the bearing was seated, I installed the snap ring. I wasn't having any luck with my needle nose pliers, but I found that if I just walked it in around the outside with my fingers, it actually went in very easily. Next was a new outer seal, just tapped on with a rubber mallet. Okay, so a quick demo of how we got to be careful when we're putting the hub into the bearing on the way back in is, so it's going to come in, this is the outside of the truck over here, this is the old bearing obviously, and it'll get pressed in, and when it's getting pressed in for the first half, this half of this bearing, it likes that, it's getting pushed in further, you know? But then, once it hits this second half, you can see the bearing is cut in half, so this half fell out, and then the other half is still in there. But if you keep pressing, this half of the bearing will just push right out, unless you have something on here so that as you press the hub through, it won't push out this middle piece. So that's a very important part, is as we push this through, we're not letting this get pushed out. We are supporting this and letting the hub come through. So to support and hold pressure on the back of that bearing, I actually used the spacer that we removed before, and it kind of hits two birds with one stone because it needs to get pressed onto the hub anyways. I was actually very happy with how the hub was pressing in. It felt smooth, it required a lot less force than the bearing did, and honestly, the only sort of difficult part was lining up the spacer in the back so that the hub could pass through it. If it was off center at all, the end of the hub would hit it, and it wouldn't press any further, but it really only took a few times to get it lined up properly, and then we were good to go. Well, we should have been good to go. Okay guys, I just made a critical mistake that I hope didn't just cost me the job. I'm not trying to be dramatic at all, but I put in this, let's see here, take this out of here. I put in this spacer here, and then I was getting ready to put in the ABS ring on top of it, and that's when I realized that the ABS ring goes in first, and then the spacer cinches it down. So, I'm not gonna lie, like I was on the verge of tears. This project has just been killing me today. And man, so I had to press the hub back out just a little bit, just so that the spacer would come out. Then I put the ABS ring on the spacer and then cinched it all back together. I don't know, it felt kind of loose when I was, after I loosened it up and I was trying to get it all back together, it felt like a bad bearing. So now that it's all back together, it feels really tight, but also the turning is a little bit tighter than it was. So I really, really hope I didn't screw anything up permanently in here, but huge gotcha. Make sure that you put the ABS ring on before you cinch everything down with that spacer on the back. Man. So yeah, when you're pressing the hub in and using the spacer to support and hold pressure on the bearing, just make sure that you have the toothed ABS ring beneath the spacer so that it's pressed in there as well. It was such a freaking buzzkill after I felt great getting the hub in so smoothly to look over and see the ABS ring sitting over on this side. I was like, I really hope that this just sort of sits on top, but no, it goes on the inside. So learn from my mistake, and definitely don't forget that. I'm still not even sure if it's affected the bearing significantly, but it's definitely recommended for it to be a set and forget sort of situation, not really meant to be pulled in and out. Regardless, I'll keep you updated on how it's doing. Here I'm just sort of buttoning things up, reattaching the lower ball joint, adding some anti-seize to the new hub, and reinstalling the brakes. The axle nut is torqued to 173 foot-pounds, and then I put the lock washer and the cotter pin through it, and then finally the dust cover just to seal it all in. I threw the wheels on, and we were good to go. Okay, so I think the brakes are dragging a little bit. That's why it's not spinning very far. But there's no more up and down play at all, so I'm feeling pretty good. I'm gonna go take it for a test drive. Hopefully the problem's fixed. I'm still a little worried about how I had to pull it back out and then push it back in again, but I don't know, I guess we'll see. Man, so that was something. It is a doozy doing wheel bearings without a press. It's possible, I just did it, but holy crap. I started at 10 in the morning and it's 7:45 at night. Got to add a few hours for videoing because it really adds a lot of time, and then also running to the store a couple times also screws it up. But man, that was a lot. I also shot myself in the foot a little bit by screwing up the putting the spacer on before the ABS ring, so that sucked, but it feels like it worked out. I don't hear any noises, which is great. I can't remember the last time I drove and it was just like really quiet. You can just hear the tires, which is, man, such a good feeling. So we'll see if, hopefully it lasts, fingers crossed. Man, I really hope I didn't screw it up with that, pulling it back out a little bit. But anyways, only time will tell. That's it though. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.